Ravi Pitha. I'm handling Fortinet as a pre-sales consultant in Redington Gulf. So if you guys have any query during the presentation, you can put your questions into the question and answer window. And once the presentation is over, I will answer all of your query. So today's agenda for the webinar is the FortiClient integrated endpoint protection. So I will give you the introduction of the FortiClient and what are the different use cases of FortiClient. And recently Fortinet has acquired the EDR solution as well. So I will give you the brief introduction of Forti EDR solution in the session. So let's start. So you might have heard the news or the threat reports that endpoint device remain vulnerable. Threat actors either focus their attack on the endpoint or compromise them for much greater attacks, such as the DOS is one of the most popular one. And the SAN survey reported that 44% of the company survey admitted to having an endpoint compromise in last 24 months. This was old report, but during 2020 Verizon data breach report, which is made of approximately more than 150k incident, ransomware was the third most common breach attack, and cyber criminal use similar infection tactics on victims' computer, using their resources to mine cryptocurrency, that is also known as cryptojacking. And the 2020 Verizon data breach report shows that 20% of the around 10% of the organizations received cryptocurrency mining malware at some point throughout the year. So the question is, how does end customer computer become compromised, infected, and need to be re-imaged? Also, attacker compromise endpoint for two reasons. The endpoint itself has a valuable data, or the endpoint is a starting point to allow a lateral movement within the company, which is worst. What is the worst scenario in the customer environment that you have to ask to the customer first before starting any conversation with the customer regarding an endpoint solution. So what are some of the gaps in the endpoint security that we see today? First, there is a lack of visibility with mobility, cloud, user autonomy, IT security, especially network security. Companies are losing visibility to their endpoint. Fortinet can see in detail what's going on into their operating system and file level with FortiEDR, and at the network level with FortiClient. We will explore this two options later in the presentation. Second, unpatched vulnerability continued to be an issue. Gartner predicted that by end of 2020, 99% of the vulnerabilities exploited would continue be once known by security and IT professional at the same type of incident. And the third is the attacks are moving faster than ever. Most compromises can happen in minutes or seconds. Note that the FortiEDR gives security admin the ability to build playbook that instantly respond to the threat. So that we will see it later. If we in the marketplace, we see that endpoint protection and endpoint detection and response are merging together. Endpoint protection solution typically whitelist or blacklist application and detect file-based malware, either detecting known malware with signature or unknown malware with the heuristic scanning. That is what endpoint protection solution typically do. Response option were primarily limited to a simple alert when a security incident happened, or maybe a quarantining a suspicious file. And by contrast, endpoint detection and response product recorded both events and security events to analyze later. The response tended to focus on containing, remediating, and forensically investigating the root cause. Customer need preventive feature of endpoint protection to keep endpoint safe with forensic playbook capability of an EDR to determine what exactly happened after an incident. Since the solution have recently converged, however, we see more vendors offer a standard set of feature with optional add-on in the area of web filtering, DLP, full disk encryption, and so on. And if we look at the third-party overall test result, Fortinet's endpoint security solution have done very well in third-party testing on AV comparative. A FortiClient with FortiSandbox and a FortiEDR achieved a 100% detection rate with lowest false positive of all the solution tested. And in 2019 NSS lab testing, Fortinet solution, which is of course comprised of Sandbox, FortiGate itself, and FortiClient, it receives a AA rating after demonstrating a security effectiveness of almost around 99% with zero false positive. The NSS Lab of Advanced Endpoint Protection Group test evaluate product for security effectiveness, performance, and total cost of ownership. This products generally includes endpoint security technologies that is a combination that combine the protective capability of
Hello.
anti-theft.
Hi, Anna. All well. How are you doing?
Bindya, can you please mute
So
yourself?
I did not hear back from you with regards to the virtual
Hello,
boardroom proposal that
hello,
I
Bindya.
sent. And then I was just checking my email and it had bounced back because of the size of
Hello,
the file.
Bindya. Can you please mute yourself? Thank you. So this product include endpoint security technologies that combine. So let me start from the beginning of this slides. So this NSS Lab Advanced Endpoint Protection Group, it test evaluates the product for the, as I mentioned, security effectiveness, performance, and total cost of ownership. These products include endpoint security technologies that combine the protective capability of anti-theft product with detection, investigation, and prevention capability of endpoint. FortiClient specifically with integrated FortiSandbox earned a recommended rating for a third year in a row. And even our TCO is very less, and we have proven resistant to all evasion techniques with zero false positive. According to 2020 Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report, email and web are main infection vector, and attackers now favor document and script-based attack. The good news is that FortiClient is extremely effective in detecting and blocking these types of attack and achieved 100% score in 2019 NSS lab result. And Fortinet endpoint security integrates with other security element of security fabric. So if you are familiar with Fortinet product portfolio, you must have heard about the Fortinet security fabric. And this ecosystem includes FortiGate, FortiSandbox, FortiAnalyzer, and FortiAuthenticator. It leverage various FortiGuard intelligence technology, such that includes the CPRL, like content pattern recognition language, to provide end visibility, control, more than compliance, and remote access. So we have basically three type of agent. One is fabric agent in FortiClient. Then second one is the security remote access. Then the third one is the sandbox integration and advanced protection. So you can use whatever you would like. So security remote access, it's of course it's a free of cost. There is no cost for that, IPsec VPN or SSL VPN. But apart from that, if you want to use any of the other technology, then in that case you will require a license. So first, let's talk about the FortiClient Fabric Agent. So FortiClient Fabric Agent, it uses the telemetry and compliance data to connect host endpoint with other Fortinet devices in Fortinet Security Fabric. So what it will do, that allows the FortiClient to report endpoint vulnerability, to manage FortiGate or FortiClient EMS for policy enforcement. And latest FortiClient EMS, that is a endpoint management solution server, and FortiClient agent have added software inventory and a Linux Fabric agent as well. And on Fortinet website, you can find that all the latest client that supports the different operating system. So how it will look like in FortiGate, for example. So by connecting endpoint host to Fortinet Security Fabric, and even you can do Microsoft AD integration, administrator have a better visibility at the device and user level. So that on FortiGate itself, you can provide a compliance control and even optionally to automatically respond to the threats. So this Fabric agent, it will send information from the endpoint to FortiGate and FortiAnalyzer to make it easier to visually represent risk, which in our example here are unpatched endpoint, unpatched vulnerability. So this information is coming from the Fabric agent. And from FortiGate firewall, we have visibility as to what the general endpoint hygiene look like on our network. And we can optionally patch this client or a FortiClient EMS, which we will cover later in the presentation. So in the previous example, we saw what's visible on FortiGate if endpoint are using FortiClient Fabric agent. Here we see, now here we will see some automation option that are also available. So in addition to quarantine malicious file or submitting object to sandbox for analysis and applying patches, by integrating with security fabric. Uh, so FortiClient can also automate the process of quarantine entire suspicious or a compromised machine. And this automation tool allows you to contain threat and immediately respond to the incident and content outbreak. So this all thing you can do it from FortiGate if you have the Fabric agent. So this is one of the use cases where we have deployed the Fortinet. This use case feature as an automobile dealership that needed a security upgrade to comply with GDPR regulation, and by using FortiClient and connecting endpoint to their security fabric, IT team, or I would say network administrator, they were able to enhance visibility and control to the network. So that is one of the use case that where we have deployed the FortiClient. The second one is the secure remote access. So recently, many organizations, as we went into the COVID-19 situation, have required their employee to work remotely to prevent the spread of coronavirus. FortiClient help secure internal enterprise resources by doing some of the things like it includes both SSL and IPsec VPN client that work in concert with FortiGate to allow access to corporate resources. VPN capability are enhanced. You can enhance it with Forti Authenticator that allow the FortiClient VPN to work with Forti token for a two-factor authentication that will add another layer of security on top of VPN session. And single sign-on applies an identity policy to user for specific access. So this functionality of IPsec VPN is free of cost. You don't need to do anything. It's available as without license. You can use the teleworker solution. Next is the FortiClient EMS or or FortiClient Enterprise Management Server. This is like a client server architecture where you have to install one server and manage all your clients from one central location. As we saw previously, FortiClient and Fortinet Security Fabric works together. Uh, administrator have visibility and control over the network, and the FortiClient send the data to help IT team to identify specific risk. So in this section, I will give you a deep understanding of the management system perspective of the endpoint that can enforce policy, so to fix vulnerabilities that found on the FortiClient. So we use FortiClient EMS to deploy FortiClient. Using EMS, the security administrator can automatically provision an endpoint with customizable policies based on the role of through the whatever is there, or based on the group, uh, by doing the integration with the Active Directory. And once a FortiClient is connected to EMS, admin can perform remote actions such as active antivirus, vulnerability scan, manage quarantine file, or even quarantine a compromised endpoint from the rest of the network. And some of the additional feature for the FortiClient EMS includes AD LDAP integration, and changes applied to Microsoft Active Directory or even Google Admin Organization group are automatically integrated into our EMS. So we support Chromebook as well. You can integrate Google Admin Organization. Web filter profile can be created as well, and then real-time dashboard and reporting. That is the basic functionality which you will get. So moving on, FortiClient EMS dashboard, this is how it looks like, which provides you the visibility to view information about a system and endpoint. In this example here, you can see this includes some of the same summary information about the vulnerability scan that previously were on the FortiGate dashboard, which I just showed 4-5 slides earlier. Here in FortiClient EMS, administrator can configure setting for a vulnerability scanning frequency and the specific patching option. And using FortiClient EMS software inventory feature, administrator can inventory software and search for the version that introduce unnecessary risk. From this interface, an admin can centrally view a list of software installed on endpoints and easily set policies that limit access to potentially unwanted business applications. For example, this software list includes detail of each application, such as vendor, then there is a version information is there, and you can search this information by application or a vendor name on the same panel which you see here. And using the FortiClient EMS connector, we can easily link between FortiClient EMS and FortiGate. So dynamic update in the FortiClient EMS now automatically flow to the FortiGate, and this makes it easier to create and enforce policy on user group that might be continuously changing. And a dynamic access control on FortiClient EMS that will help to categorize endpoint in real time based on particular rules such as vulnerability, application that is running on that machine, certificate matching, device type, threat, and a sandbox zero-day detection. So the rules are applied to each endpoint, and when the rule is triggered, it applies a tag to that endpoint. And once a FortiClient EMS connector is set up on FortiGate, which I showed you in the previous slide, FortiClient EMS updates FortiGate with this tag, where they can be used in the firewall policies. Then, of course, you can Of course, we can use the FortiGuard URL database to determine web content, web filtering, and we have more than 75 plus URL categories. Works with Google Safe Search as well. So everything what you can do on the FortiGate itself, you can. Sorry. So FortiGuard web filter database, whatever is there on the FortiGate, same database is available for the FortiClient, and you can configure the policies based on a specific user, so that web filter policy will be applied by the FortiClient, not by FortiGate. And this will helpful when somebody is using the machine remotely. So this is the use case. Here are some example of using a tags for dynamic access control. So in the first example, each user was tagged based on the AD group. The FortiGate uses those tags to grant each user access to the respective subnet as well as internet. Now, for example, Kate gets a vulnerability. When EMS sees this, it applies a new tag to the endpoint and send it over to the FortiGate. In this example, we can simply show that Kate is denied access to engineering subnet, but it could have been fully quarantined also. So another example, we see that here Jenny, who is in the sales group, has access to sales subnet. As Cat in engineering group would only have access to engineering subnet and not sales subnet. But when Kate is transferred to the sales department, she moved into the sales group in Active Directory. When EMS sees this, the new group membership, the engineering tag are removed and new sales tag are added to the endpoint and forwarded to the FortiGate. Based on this new tag, Cat now has access to sales subnet and is denied access to the engineering subnet. And lastly, in this example, someone is visiting the office. As this is an unknown endpoint, they might be granted access to internet, but will be denied access to any of the critical subnet. And finally, here is how a FortiClient and FortiSandbox integrate. To better understand how these products work together, keep in mind that all 4 threat prevention product mentioned can submit object to FortiSandbox for analysis and receive the result. FortiMail can hold and block file based on the result, while FortiGate can quarantine device that receives those objects in parallel with FortiSandbox analysis with just one click based on results. And FortiClient can be configured to either hold for analysis or quarantine afterwards. In addition to returning the result of individual file or individual analysis to submitted device, FortiSandbox it dynamically generate threat intelligence that can be distributed as automated update to FortiGate and FortiClient, so that we can block advanced attack that's seeking entry in multiple places. So this is same like any of the model detect any suspicious file. So FortiSandbox will gives the update to all the Fortinet devices, whether it's FortiClient, FortiWeb, FortiMail, or FortiGate. And when customer choose to share FortiSandbox analysis with FortiGuard Labs, which is the Fortinet own update server, all Fortinet customers and product will receive update protection. So it's like updating all the customer around the globe of Fortinet. is what we discussed. So FortiClient will submit the file and wait for the result. And once it identify that this is the file which is malicious, it can quarantine the file. And Forti Sandbox can send the real-time intelligence update to all the other devices into the security fabric network. And so on, it can share the intelligence with FortiGuard Labs. Now we'll move to the Forti EDR. So this will I will give you the brief introduction on the Forti EDR. So it's a rebrand of Encilio Advanced Endpoint Protection Solution. It offers the CISO Advanced Endpoint Protection with real-time automated endpoint detection and response. So Forti EDR is an advanced endpoint protection solution that detect and diffuses threat in real time to protect critical infrastructure while addressing a cyber resource shortage. And by combining endpoint protection, detection, and response, Forti EDR stop breach in real time and remotely automate remediation response to allow endpoint resiliency. 100% prevention, it's of course unrealistic, and as CISO defend against more frequent and sophisticated threat, they look to make their SOC center more mature with right tool set. So Forti EDR does this in the following ways. For example, by using machine learning, antivirus behavior, machine learning, antivirus behavior-based detection to help determine threat. By combining a real-time and post-compromise protection into an easy-to-use solution. And lastly, creating customized playbook based on assets value and threat categorization. Here it is important to note how EDR protect endpoint in both pre and post execution phase. So first, EDR has the ability to identify and harden endpoint's attack surface, and files that are allowed to execute are analyzed as to whether or not they are malicious. Once a program or a file is confirmed to be malicious, Forti EDR move to response phase and have option to use playbook to automate. And these playbooks are contextual, so a SOC can custom design incident response based on a company risk tolerance and a category of a threat that is there in the network. So here we break down pre and post infection phase and identify the subcomponent. So during pre-infection, we predict and prevent malware from executing, whereas during post-infection, we detect and contain threat as well as respond to that incident. To help proactively mitigate risk in pre-infection phase, Forti EDR automates attack surface policy uh, with vulnerability assessment and other securities. So this will allow a SOC team to reduce the attack surface by discovering rough device, track applications, and virtually patch potential risky software. So Forti EDR uses a machine learning, a next generation antivirus engine to stop malware pre-execution. So the antivirus, this engine is a lightweight, very of course up to date with real-time threat intelligence, and has a USB device control as well. Now during the post-infection phase, Forti EDR provide real-time detection and containment by detecting and diffusing a fileless malware and other advanced attack to protect data and prevent breaches. So whenever FortiEDR detects suspicious process, flow, or behavior, it immediately diffuses the potential threat and blocking all outbound communication and access to file system from those process if and once requested. This real-time detection prevent a data exfiltration as well as command and control communication that results from installing a malware. At the same time, FortiEDR backend continues to gather additional evidence with some enriched event data to better classify the incident. And once incidents are formally classified in post-infection phase, EDR can streamline incident response with a customizable playbook. So this playbook manually or automatically roll back malicious changes. And automatic response include removing malicious file or process, reversing a persistent change, notifying user, isolating application and device, or even opening a ticket to the team. So first generation EDR solution relied on manual response to contain a threat, which took hours, if not days. By contrast, FortiEDR diffuses threat in real time out of the box with a little to no tweaking. This immediately stops the breach and prevent exfiltration and ransomware encryption, which is most important. Optional playbooks which is available if a SOC team needs to further streamline their incident response workflow, they can do that as well. So let's look at the basic FortiEDR architecture. So these are the component. FortiEDR platform includes several component, a collector, which is a lightweight endpoint agent, central manager, of course, the admin console that handles the alerts and policies, aggregator, that controls alert messaging between collector and central manager, threat hunting repository for that is big data threat hunting repository, and the core, which is a real-time policy engine responsible for enforcing security policies. And the deployment option are hybrid cloud, cloud manage as well, then on-premises for air gapped, and multi-tenancy is also available for the MSSP. So this is one of the case study that Fortinet has replaced a legacy endpoint provider. During the POC time, a crypto mining software was found on 30,000 endpoint. The SLA for MSSP responsible for finding this only had an SLA of 72 hours, and FortiEDR was able to automatically detect before the SLA was expired. So this is one of the use case, the top use case, and case study was there. So now we'll review what is the difference between FortiClient and FortiEDR. While there are some minimal overlap in endpoint protection area, mainly in malware prevention and sandbox integration, FortiClient and FortiEDR addresses two different buying center. So FortiClient provide fabric visibility, endpoint access control, secure remote access VPN, and web filtering. So those who usually make this decision are a general enterprise network security buyer and will likely to have been the one who purchased the FortiGate. Whereas FortiEDR, on the other hand, is used primarily by security operations that are in charge of incident response. In larger organizations, there may be little to no overlap with the networking team. So this is where the actual difference is come, and the buyer is also different of the FortiClient and FortiEDR. So this is it from my side. If you guys have any query now, please type your answer in the question and answer window. I'll be happy to answer that. Do send me your query for any requirement for the POCs or anything related to Fortinet product. I'll get in touch with you. Thank you guys very much. Thank you very much, guys. Have a nice day ahead. Bye bye.